Welcome to LearnHowToQuilt.com. I'm Anne, and this is the third video in our Star Sampler series. Today, I'll be showing you how to make this friendship star. First, you'll learn how to draft this block to figure out the cutting sizes, and then I'll show you a method for sewing it together. Since you need 3 of these blocks to complete this quilt, I decided to show you 2 more methods for putting the star block together. You'll find these in the next video in this series. As a quilter, I think it's important to learn different methods and techniques so I can decide which one works best for a particular project or for my skill set. With each video in this series, I'll be posting a list of all the topics covered. If you're not interested in these different techniques, just skip ahead. The links are listed below. Hope you can join us. You can download this free pattern at LearnHowToQuilt.com under Quilt Classes, Star Sampler, or you can click on the link below. The directions follow along with today's video. Plus, I've added some templates here in case you don't have access to rotary cutting equipment. I'll be using these 2 fabrics for my friendship star, a light and a medium. I usually like more contrast between these 2, but for now I'm going to try to follow the values in the original quilt. In this star, there's very little contrast between the light and the medium. As I mentioned earlier, you can get a free pattern for this 6-inch friendship star at our website. But what if you want to make a different size block? In this series, you'll learn how to draw up your own patterns. Remember, if you're not interested in this, you can just skip to the next topic. Before I attempt a new block, I like to draw it out on graph paper. This helps me get a feel for the block, and sometimes it helps me to figure out an easy way to construct the block. I usually just use 8.5 by 11-inch graph paper, but for blocks that are bigger than 8 inches, I use larger sheets. The first thing you want to do is draw a square the size of your block. We're making a 6-inch block, so I've drawn a 6-inch square using this marker, but you'll want to use a pencil. I'm just using this so you can see. So let's go over to this block. You want to look for the grid in the block. So I see that there are three equal sections going down and 3 equal sections going across. So 6 divided by 3 equals 2 inches. So these grid lines need to be 2 inches apart on this 6-inch square. If you were making a 9-inch square, then 9 divided by 3 would be 3 inches, and these grid lines would need to be 3 inches apart. Now let's look at the divisions in these individual squares. I go across this row and I see this middle square, which is right here. I see that there's a line here that goes from the corner all the way through the diagonal to this point. I'll draw that line. I come back over here and I see that in this second row, this first block right here has a diagonal also, and it goes in this direction. And then this square also has a diagonal. This last square has a diagonal that goes in this direction. Even though this is a simple design, I sometimes get mixed up and I draw the diagonals in opposite directions. So take your time and double check. This is what my star will look like when it's finished inside the quilt. But when I have to cut this out, I need to add seam allowance. So first, I'm going to put some seam allowance around the outside edge, and we're using 1/4 inch seams, so I'll add 1/4 inch, and I like to just put dashes down so I know that that's where the seam allowance is. So when I sew this block up, before I put it in my quilt, the size of the block is going to be all the way around here. Oh, I'm getting messy. If I was making templates out of this picture, out of this graph paper, I'd be much more precise. I'm just making this to sort of get some measurements. I see that I'm going to need to cut a square here let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to have to cut 5 squares. And each one of these squares, I know that this grid is 2 inches by 2 inches. So these are 2-inch squares. I'll just put them in there. When I cut this 2-inch square out, I have to remember to add seam allowance, which is 1/4 inch here, 1/4 inch here, and also 1/4 inch on this side and on this side. So I've drawn a little picture here. Here's that 2-inch square, and I have to have it 1/4 inch there, 1/4 inch there. If I add that all together, it's going to be 2.5 inches. So I have to cut that 2.5 inches. And I like to put a C to remind me that that's the cutting size, not the finished size. So the rule for adding seam allowances to rectangles is to always add 1/2 inch to the finished size. Now these half square triangles, put that there, are a little bit different. You'll notice they form a square. So if you cut out a square and then cut it on the diagonal, you'll get 2 half square triangles. And you can see here's 1, 2, 3, 4 for that star. And you also need 1, 2, 3, 4 for the background fabric. The rules for these are a little bit different because not only are you adding seam allowance around the outside edge, but you also have to add seam allowance in here. And so the rules vary from 7/8 of an inch to 1 inch for seam allowances to the finished sizes. I'm not going to explain the difference between that. I've left some links below so you can, if you want to learn more about half square triangles, you can check that out. So for this pattern, I'll be using the 1 inch rule. So this is a 2-inch square here, and I add an inch seam allowance. So that means that I need to cut 3-inch squares in order to get these half square triangles. Before cutting, make sure all your fabric's been pressed. Here's my 4 2.5-inch squares from the background and 1 2.5-inch square from the star fabric. You'll need 3-inch squares from the background fabric and 3-inch squares from the star fabric for these triangles. Each square is going to give you 2 triangles. So for the star, you'll need 2 squares at 3 inches, and then you'll need 2 squares for the background at 3 inches. Usually I'll cut these on the diagonal now, but we're going to try a little bit different technique here. Draw a diagonal on the back of these 2 fabrics. You want to draw from point to point. I'd probably use a marking pencil, but it won't show very well, so I'm going to try this pen here. Oops, my fabric's moving. Want to make sure that you come out right on the corner on each one of those corners, and this one's just off a little, so let me move that over. If your fabric's slipping too much, you might want to try this out. This is an old board that we had, and my husband glued a piece of fine sandpaper to the top of it, and that holds this fabric in place when I want to draw on it. So it makes it a little bit easier for me to mark that line. After you draw the diagonals, you want to put right sides together. Make sure that the edges are all even, and then stitch a 1/4 inch seam on each side of that black line. Cut through the center, and you've got 2 sets of half square triangles. I'm going to press these to the dark. So after they've been pressed, you want to trim them down to 2.5 inches. And you can't just start trimming to 2.5 inches. You want to make sure that this diagonal line right here is on this 45-degree line on your ruler. So let me get that lined up. And I don't want this to go past, or I don't want this to be shorter than 2.5 inches. So it looks pretty good right here. See if I can get it, whoops. hard for me to get around this camera. Okay, there we go. That's going to be better. So there's one corner trimmed, and you want that diagonal line to come out right at that point. So put your ruler on that 45-degree angle, and now I want to line up this 2.5-inch edge on those cut lines. Doesn't look like I'll be trimming very much off. There's my 2.5-inch block. That's going to go right here. When all of these have been squared up, lay out your star. You'll be sewing in rows. Put right sides together. Make sure all the edges have been lined up. And I like to hold the side to be sewn in my right hand, and then I place it down next to my needle so I know that this is what needs to be sewn, because it's real easy to get this mixed up. But if you feel more comfortable pinning, you can pin this. I know I pin backwards. Most people, I think, like to pin this way. So however you want to pin it, that's fine. Instead of just sewing one at a time, I like to take a couple of these over to the sewing machine and sew them. So this is the right side. Oop. I put these pins in. I can't remember what I did, so let me just double check. Yeah, this is the right side right here. I'll just hold it like that and take this to the sewing machine. Here's the side to be sewn. And let me readjust these just to make sure that everything's lined up. Oops. Want it lined up on all 4 sides. I have a leader in here to get started. I'll be sewing a 1/4-inch seam. Pick up my next section, make sure everything lines up, and then run it through. Line it all up, butt it right up against the last one, and stitch. When you open these up, this diagonal shouldn't come out to the edge here. It should come about 1/4 inch over from the edge. Put right sides together. Just gonna stack up these in my hand. This is the side. This is the side that needs to be sewn. And let me line up these edges and stitch. Line up these edges and stitch. Line up those edges and stitch. I'll take these over to the ironing board to press. And I press towards the squares. So you can see it goes out to the square. That's a natural way the fabric wants to fall. So I've pressed towards the square. I've pressed towards these squares. Take 2 of the rows and put right sides together. You want to match these seams. So what I usually do is start on the edge, on the ends, get everything lined up and pin, and go to this end, get everything lined up and pin, and then pull back that seam. And because of the way you pressed, those seams should nestle in right up against each other. You can feel it when they get there. You can pin it. These 2 seams will nestle up against each other. You can pin it. Always take out your pins. Make sure you don't stitch over them. I'm going to use my scissors here to hold that in place when I'm sewing. Now, I don't know if you can see, there's an X here. That's where the point is. And so when you sew over that X, you want to be about 1 thread on this side of that intersection. So here's that X, and I'm trying to sew about a thread. Oh, I might have been too close, but we'll see. Okay, we're looking to see that this point matches here and that this point matches here. That looks good. So I'll take this last one, and actually it was like this, but these are interchangeable. So I'll put right sides together. I'm going to do the same thing. I start lining things up on the edge. I don't know, I just find that's easier these days. I don't always do it that way. I'm going to line this up here, pin, pull back these seams to make sure that they're matching, pin. I don't know if you can see, but up here, this is a little bit, this is about 1/8 of an inch taller than this one. And so I want to see where that point is. And it looks like that point comes out, it looks like it's about 1/4 of an inch from this edge. So I'll use this as my guide, not this. So let's put that in there. Okay, I'm ready to stitch. Oh, not too bad. Okay, that's matching. And this one, it might be a little off, but I think when I press it, I can make it match okay. So I'll take this and press. Here's my completed block. It should measure 6.5 inches. So it looks like I'm a little, just a hair off around the edge here, but I can press it and get it out to exactly 6.5. In the next video in this series, I'll show you some other methods for making this block. Hope you stay tuned. If you have any questions or concerns, please leave a comment below or email me at ann@learnhowtoquilt.com. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.